of power. But in many places around the world, we have embassies and diplomatic relations with countries that have abominable human rights records, that repress their people on a daily basis. And yet we don't freeze diplomatic relations with them over the arrest of dissidents. Why do you think that that should be the case in Cuba?
Well, I'm not an apologist for the Chinese regime, for example. I think it's a horrible government, but you can make the case that there's a lot of economic freedom in China. There is no economic freedom in Cuba. You can't be the owner of any property in Cuba unless you're the regime. If you want to open up a hotel, which many folks from around the world have opened up hotels, it's a great tourist industry in Cuba. You pay the government, the Cuban regime, in dollars, and then the Cuban regime pays the workers who they hire. You cannot hire workers directly. They pay them in pesos, which are practically worthless. So you really have kind of a slave economy that's going on in Cuba. And the president says, look, when you've tried something for so many years and it hasn't worked, let's try something new. The reality is that every other country in the world has been wheeling and dealing and doing unbridled tourism in Cuba for these many years, and they have not brought the Cuban system to a democracy either. So I don't think that it's fair to say that we've got to change our policy with a despotic regime that continues to repress the Cuban people and has no economic opening either.
But I guess my point is, if we're doing trade in lots of other countries with despots sitting in leadership positions, why shouldn't we do that with Cuba? I mean, why should Cuba be held to a different standard than the rest of the world?
Because of the way that the regime is set up in Cuba. We don't have a one-size-fits-all foreign policy, and we never have. We have different policies for different countries. And when we established that economic embargo, we said we would lift it once we have freedom for the Cuban people. You know, this president doesn't even do anything to get any concessions out of Castro. Castro still gives safe harbor to fugitives from U.S. justice. He's got dozens of people who are wanted by the U.S. law, and he gives them refuge. Has the Obama administration demanded a change in that? No.
Well,
we also have millions of...
But the administration has said that this movement forward, that's one of the sticking points.
What movement? There is no movement forward. That's
well, I would say that the president and Raul Castro meeting for the first time in 50 years, the leaders of two nations have met, is movement.
I think it's a meeting. For sure, and the president can go to North Korea or speak to the leader of Kim Jong-un, and it's a meeting, but you could ask the North Korean people whether they feel better off because of that meeting. Ask the Cuban people whether they're better off. Look, they all want...
Are you comparing the plight of the Cubans right now with the plight of the North Koreans? Do you think that they're in the same position?
I'm saying that the better example to use when you talk about the system of government in Castro's Cuba and the lack of economic freedom, it is not the Chinese model and it's not the Vietnamese model. It's the North Korean model, where you have total state control over people's ability to get together. Try to have a press conference in Cuba right now.